The views expressed, opinions given, and any communication made between the hosts and guests of What Are You Afraid of Horror and Paranormal show do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of Para-X Radio, EMC Network, or all services that play this show. The hosts and services are not responsible for the actions of their guests, and the original rights of all intellectual property is retained by the creator, and all work is used with either permission or Creative Commons license. The show is for entertainment purposes only. I'm horror author T. Fox Dunham.
And I'm horror author and filmmaker Phil Thomas.
And tonight we're asking you,
what are you afraid of? Philadelphia's horror home with hosts T. Fox Dunham and Phil Thomas.
This is T. Fox Dunham, and on tonight's episode, Curse of Blackthorn, we will be speaking to author Isobel Blackthorn. She's wonderful. We are so honored at What Are You Afraid of Horror and Paranormal show to have spoken to many authors around the world who write in such various styles, and each time we speak to a new author, it's like traveling to an entirely new universe. Now we're talking to Australia, which is this evening for me, it's morning for her. We'll be speaking to Isobel Blackthorn. She's a prolific novelist of original fiction across a range of genres, including dark psychological thrillers, gripping mystery novels, captivating travel fiction, and hilarious dark satire. Isabella holds a PhD in Western Esotericism for her groundbreaking study of the text of the my mouth's not working with me. Of the text of Theosophist Alice A. Bailey. Isabel carries a lifelong passion for the Canary Islands, Spain, her former home. She's a Londoner originally, and she currently lives near Melbourne, Australia. Good gods. And she currently lives near Melbourne, Australia. How are you this evening, Isabel? Thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for that lovely introduction. I'm very well. Sun is shining, and the world is a happy place right here in my writing room.
Oh, what's your writing room like?
Well, it's kind of in keeping with your show. It's I live in a 1930s house, vintage. Nothing's been done to it. Number 13, don't you know? And it's got wood paneling, dark wood paneling on the walls, right up to the picture rail. And so it's kind of dark, and diamond pane windows, all that stuff. Really high ceilings. Not that I see much of it staring at my computer screen, but still, the vibe is there.
You know, it's there. It's like having an orchestra playing in the background.
That's right.
Well, perhaps you could share with us a photo for our website at www.whatayouafraidofpodcast.com, where you can check out all of our previous content. All of our old episodes are there, plus written interviews with many authors and paranormal investigators, plus expanded content for each show.
Well, I'd be very happy to supply a photo. I'm very proud of this house. It's quite beautiful. And, you know, oddly, I haven't felt any supernatural presences here.
We'll be pausing here with Isobel Blackthorn to play her true ghost story, The Haunting of Cockatoo, on What Are You Afraid of?
What are you afraid of?
Hi, I'm Tim Wagner, Bram Stoker award-winning author.
Hashtag Grave Girls. This is Katrina Weidman of Destination America's Paranormal Lockdown.
This is Jim Chambers. I'm the author of The Engines of Sacrifice.
This is Jasper Barr, award-winning author of The Final Cut.
And you're listening to What Are You Afraid of?
What Are You Afraid of?
To What Are You Afraid of?
What are you afraid of?
Love it. Fantoxic, please. Fantoxic.
Haunting of Cockatoo. A true ghost story, written and submitted by author Isobel Blackthorn, Australia. Read by David Walton. I couldn't have known what was in store for me when I moved into that house in Cockatoo. The house clung halfway up the steep hillside of a deep valley, accessed via a single dirt track with ditch drains to either side. Driving up that narrow lane, taking in the dense forest of tall trees, their overhanging branches, unable to see the houses behind tall fences and hedges, I could not have known the dark energies that lived there. The day I moved in, I pulled into the driveway of my new home, a modern home of Western red cedar boards, split level and dark inside, with no idea others were moving in as well. The terror began a month later. My partner and I had gone away for a week, leaving my daughter, then 20, home alone. She was staying with us and had taken the smallest bedroom, the one painted pink and green, a kid's room. First it was the lights. She would turn them off and get up later to find them on again. Next she heard knocking inside the room, in the cupboard and out in the hallway. There were cries too, cries of a child. Then she saw the little boy. She saw him scampering on all fours in the hallway. She saw him in her bedroom, standing by her bed. She left her bedroom light on all night after that, hoping the light would protect her. Unsettled, my daughter moved out as soon as she could, leaving just me and my man in that Cockatoo house. He was next to experience the weird goings-on. He would wake me in the night and tell me to stop hitting him. He said he felt a looming presence by the bedside. It was not a benevolent presence. I tried to dismiss the testimony of my daughter and my partner, but I couldn't. I knew they were not making things up. I also knew they were right. I was beginning to sense presences. There were two, a man and a boy. The boy was making all the noise. The man was distressed. He would hover in the little hallway between the bathroom and the laundry. He would stand behind me. I started to avoid looking in mirrors in case I saw him. Things were going very wrong in my relationship. In the end, I could endure the upset no longer and asked my partner to leave. It was when I was home alone that my two ghostly companions started a campaign of terror, and I started to question my sanity. The lights turning on or off was just the start. I would close the gates to the property at night to find them open in the morning. More and more I started to feel the looming presence of the man. I couldn't sleep. I had no idea if this supernatural entity would attack me. One day I was standing in the kitchen near the kettle when it suddenly switched on. I could hardly believe it. My heart started pounding. I switched the kettle off and ran back over my actions in my mind, trying to see if I could possibly have accidentally switched on the kettle. But I couldn't have. I hadn't been to that section of the bench, not for anything. I knew I had to take action. I couldn't go on living like that with those two ghosts. I had the strong sense the man and the boy were passing through, so in the bright light of day I circled the house in salt. Then I bought a smudge stick. I smudged the house, going into every corner, and as I went I spoke a mantra asking the ghosts to leave. I hoped for the best, but I was still frightened. I knew the ghosts were sort of half there and half not. My daughter could still feel their energy. So could I. Then one day I got a cat, a little white kitten. She was adorable, and she brought out the mother in me. Together we filled the house with love. The ghosts left and never returned. I moved out of that house a year later. Autobiography. Isobel Blackthorn is a prolific novelist of unique and engaging fiction. She writes dark psychological thrillers, mysteries, and contemporary and literary fiction. On the dark side are Twerk, The Cabin Sessions, and The Legacy of Old Grand Parks. Her Canary Islands collection begins with The Drago Tree and includes A Matter of Latitude and Clarissa's Warning. Her interest in the occult is explored in The Unlikely Occultist, a biographical novel of Alice A. Bailey, and The Dark Mystery, A Perfect Square. Even her first novel, Asylum, contains a touch of the magical. Isobel is at work on her fourth Canary Islands novel, a sweeping historical work based on her own family history, and a noir thriller based on the short story Lacquer, to be released in the forthcoming A Time for Violence anthology. Isobel has a background in Western Esotericism, and she's a qualified astrologer. She holds a PhD from the University of Western Sydney for her research on the works of Theosophist Alice A. Bailey, the mother of the New Age. British by birth, Isobel entered this world in Farnborough, Kent, as Yvonne Margaret Grimble. She has since been Yvonne Rogers, before changing her name completely in 1996 to Isobel Schofield. After a number of years as Isobel Whitman, she is now very happily and permanently Isobel Blackthorn. Isobel has lived in England, Australia, Spain, and the Canary Islands. She now lives on Australia's southern coast with her cat, Psyche. Check out Isobel at her website, https://isabelblackthorn.com.
Mercy, a new horror medical thriller from author T. Fox Dunham, published by Bloodbound Books. Based on the author's horrific battle with a rare form of lymphoma that involved intense chemotherapy and radiation, Fox turns the horror of his experience into terror on the page.
William Saint is dying of cancer. On most days, death seems like a humane alternative to the treatment. Stricken with fever, William is rushed to Mercy, notorious as a place to send the sickest of the poor and uninsured to be forgotten, and finds the hospital in even worse condition than his previous visit.
Willie's memories faded. He grabbed his sack head, the sack head of the scarecrow, picking at the exposed chicken wire to hold them in. However, the memories fell out of the holes in his face. They wormed and crawled from the leather flesh and the old clothing of the scarecrow, then squirmed and wiggled down his body.
The grounds are unkempt, the foundation is cracking, and like the wild mushrooms sprouting from the fissures of decay around it, something is growing inside the hospital. Something dark.
Fangoria gives Mercy 3.5 out of 4 skulls. Dunham has channeled his many brushes with the other side into the exquisitely rendered, lyrical, supernatural hospital thriller Mercy.
It's feeding on the sickness and sustaining itself on the staff, changing them, and now it wants Willie.
Come now, Mr. Saint. Just a little more of that sweet milk. So salty and so good. You won't miss it. And we ever do so like our delicacies here at Mercy Hospital.
Part medical horror, part supernatural suspense, Mercy is a hard-hitting fever dream of a novel. I enjoyed the hell out of it. Tim Wagner, author of The Way of All Flesh and Eat the Night. Available from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and bookstores everywhere in both print and digital versions.
Life is an addiction.
Let go. Let it all burn.
Explore the darkness.
Find out what goes bump in the night. Did you hear that?
Did you see that? What's that bright light in the sky? Oh, we so need to investigate.
Calling all witches and sensitives.
Explore the paranormal.
With host
Shauna
and Vicky
from Geeks Paranormal.
Wednesdays
at 9 Eastern,
8 Central.
Let's explore. On paraxradio.com.
Are you haunted by shadow people in the middle of the night?
Do you secretly love all things creepy and spooky, enjoying ghost stories and horror fiction from the best storytellers?
Do you have a true ghost experience you want to share, but no one will believe you?
If yes, listen to the professionals on What Are You Afraid Of? Horror Paranormal Show Friday nights at 9 p.m. on Para-X Radio and at www.whatareyouafraidofpodcast.com.
What Are You Afraid Of on Para-X?
Our creepy and demented hosts are on call to provide you with all your spooky needs with true ghost stories, interviews, indie music, and new horror fiction.
We are ready to scare you.
Para-X.
And we are back with author Isobel Blackthorn on What Are You Afraid Of? You lived in some wonderful places. You were born in London, you lived in the Canary Islands, and now you're in Australia. How do these individual settings affect your work?
They affect my work greatly, I think. I tend to focus on my writing very much back in the Canary Islands. I'm writing a collection of novels set there. That brings out the British side of me, kind of more quirky, upbeat, witty writing. I have set a couple of novels in Australia, and that sort of brings out it's curious. I'm not that Australian, although I've lived here for, over half my life now. But the Aussie vernacular is something that you really have to grow up with, sort of be born into. So I'm always slightly on the outside of it. But nevertheless, I do sort of almost channel it into my writing if it's set in Australia. I can't kind of help that. And I've begun to write novels. It's quite a brave step, actually, set in the United States. And that makes me nervous because obviously you've got a lot of writers, homegrown, and, what right does this little Australian upstart have to come along and set her novels in, San Francisco, Las Vegas. But it inspires me.
Indeed, and it's funny. There's another excellent upstart author who wrote several books set in the United States called Neil Gaiman. And I like to think that somebody who has this more of an outsider point of view can pick up on vibes and details that a native will miss and take for granted.
I think that's true. I think sometimes you can have too much. There's too much stimulation. There's too much that you absorb, and you will miss certain things. And I was in San Francisco, for example, just for 2 days in January, and I picked up enough, just barely enough of the energy of the place to feel inspired. I would like to have been there for longer, of course. 2 days, you don't really scratch the surface, but I froze to death on one of those topless buses, those hop-on, hop-off buses. And, being January, it was really cold. Just looking around, Tenderloin, Haight, Ashbury, the Fisherman's Wharf, went over the Golden Gate Bridge 4 times. It was good.
Oh, I was there a few years ago with a release party for my first book, The Street Martyr, and I was there in June, and I had packed for the summer, so only shorts and T-shirts, but it felt like it was March. It was so cold. And you should be used to that, being born in London, but I guess it snuck up on you.
Well, yeah, I'm used to the cold, and I had a really thick jacket with a hood, Quicksilver jacket. No, just, really outsized, extra large man's jacket. And this sort of came halfway down my legs, did the job perfectly. Everyone else was, going downstairs, get back into the warm. But there was me up there in the rain, in the wind, in the icy wind, because I had to get enough of San Francisco. And it's really quite an amazing place. I was very impressed.
It was indeed. I remember. I hope to get back there. So tell us about your work.
Well, I've written 9 novels now, and kind of unstoppable. And I have I'm a bit like a trident. I have sort of 3 major themes running. One of them, as I've said, is the Canary Islands. Another one is the occult. Some of my work puts the occult themes in the center, stage center of the writing. And then there's my dark fiction. And I don't know what it is. I'm drawn to writing horror or psychological thrillers, very noir, lots of blood. There's something about creating somebody very evil, an evil psychopath. I don't tend to go for supernatural horror. Well, having said that, ghosts do tend to feature, but not vampires and that kind of paranormal. And it tests my writing skills, and I think that's something that people who shy away from horror perhaps don't understand. It is not easy to write. It takes a lot of poise. How much are you going to give? How graphic are you going to be? How much are you going to hold back? How are you going to shock the reader? We don't want a blow-by-blow account of, almost cinematic of every little bit of a limb that comes off, or a head, or whatever it might be. So when is enough?
So select your details and be precise and be concise and don't overwhelm the reader. That's a good message.
Yeah, and style is very important.
Indeed. And I think a lot of that happens through editing.
Definitely does. And that's probably maybe it's the part of writing that I hear a lot of writers say they hate editing, but for me, it's the best bit, because that's when you can really bring style into your work.
Indeed. So, what is Western Esotericism?
Well, in a way, it's a fancy way of saying the occult. Western Esotericism is focusing on things like the Jewish Kabbalah, astrology, the Egyptian kind of classed as kind of Western, if you like, but it's the believing in the occult and occult knowledge that has built up in the Western world over the millennia, really. Freemasonry, Rosicrucians, the Illuminati, all of that stuff, and Theosophy, of course, which you mentioned. Which is a kind of a newbie on the block, really. Been around since the late 18th century. And the woman I studied was a second-generation Theosophist. She kind of broke away and started up her own thing, Alice A. and she's really the mother of the New Age, New Age movement, alternative spirituality. She was the one that was kind of served as a bridge, really, between the Theosophists and a new wave of seekers in the 1950s and 60s and beyond. And so her writing inspired a lot of those early trailblazers who, set up, particularly in places like Monterey and down in Esalen, down in Big Sur, that kind of, old hippie stuff. And Findhorn community up in Scotland. A lot of people know Findhorn.
I know it.
Yep, she was a prime mover and still is behind Findhorn. But people don't really know. She's she's also highly influential behind the scenes in the United Nations, and this is something that conspiracy theorists jump up and down about. Her people are working there quietly away behind the scenes. Most of the spiritual caucus, as far as I can make out, 11 members that, I don't know, meditate regularly and think about ways to spiritualize the United Nations. They're all Alice Bailey's people, at least most of them are, as far as I can tell. So that drives conspiracy theorists nuts. And so she's very controversial, but a lot of people don't know who she is. So I've written a biographical novel based on her life.
The Unlikely Occultist.
Yeah, exactly. The Unlikely Occultist. Unlikely because before she found Theosophy and swallowed it whole, she was an evangelical Christian, a really a sort of the missionary variety, you know. So it was quite a switch to go from Christianity into the occult, although not totally unusual. And she was trying to Christianize theosophical thinking, and interesting woman.
Like, I've always associated the term occult with a negative term. Growing up pagan and doing what I do in my own practices, we sort of use the term New Age here.
Yes.
To sort of cover that, because occult has some negative connotations of black magic and darkness and evil, and it's funny, every time someone finds out that I worship as a pagan and druidic belief and bardic belief and stuff, and if they have no association with it, they always go, oh, that's stuff. It's always stuff. That's what we should call it, the religion of that stuff. Yeah.
That stuff, that's right. And I agree with you. The occult does have negative connotation. Hence Western Esotericism, which is, it's called that a field of academic studies within religious studies. And so esotericism is a much kinder word, really, with less negative. Most people don't even know what it means, so that's fine in a way. But this is the same territory, though. Yeah.
You like to write mystery, I was reading, and mystery is an entirely different genre to itself. It's got an entirely different system that you have to develop and create. How when you start a mystery, how do you plot it? Where does it start from?
Oh, I am really a pantser. I really don't like plotting. I find it very difficult to plot. The more I plot, the less enthusiastic I am about writing my book. So I start with setting, I start with characters, I start with a kind of very thin, vague idea of a plot, and then off I go. And the mystery kind of develops. Obviously you've got to figure it out, otherwise it would just be a crock of rubbish. Your book, the end result will fail. But in a sense, it's a mystery to me at first, anyway, how it's all going to unfold. And I find that the stories often tell themselves. Once you've got certain elements in place, things start to happen. You start to see a certain internal logic that grows out of setting and character and the original ideas and themes that you're playing with.
Excellent.
And that's very much how the Clarissa's Warning, for example, which is set in the Canary Islands, that's a Gothic mystery. So that's playing on the haunted house, what you can call that a trope? No, the haunted house theme, and also home renovations, restoring a ruin, which I've had some experience in. And you kind of put those two together, and you end up with, with an interesting mix.
Who is your favorite character from a mystery novel?
Oh my word, that is a very, very difficult question to answer.
Yeah, I'm good at those.
The Mistress of Mysteries. I like whodunits. And I would have to go for Miss Marple, Agatha Christie, very, very standard.
How does your life influence your work?
In a sense, it's my past lives. I don't mean past lives in terms of reincarnation. I mean in terms of all the different places that I've lived and all the people I've met and all the things that I've done. They influence my writing enormously. At the moment, I'm working on a family history novel. My great-grandmother, sorry, I was going to put an extra great in. Well, she is great. She is great. She was incredible. And she was a spiritualist. And and I was born on her birthday, so I'm kind of drawn to that in itself. But I've been researching her genealogy because there's a bit of a mystery in my family. One of my relatives, her husband, in fact, went missing and was never seen again in the 1930s. And no one knew what had happened to him, where he'd gone. And that has affected the whole family ever through the generations ever since. And so I've been deep in unraveling their story. And it's taken me to Singapore, to Japan, to San Francisco, to Colorado, to the UK. How incredible. And even Oscar Wilde makes an appearance in this story.
Huh.
And as soon as I stumbled on the Oscar Wilde connection, that was it. I had to write it. I thought this is too amazing. Other people will be interested in this.
You're in an anthology, and this is how I know you, called A Time for Violence. It's out from Close to the Bone, and it's a wonderful collection of other crime, noir, horror, mystery authors, such as Joe Lansdale is in it, and of course our friend Mark Slade, and I'm in it, and you're in it, and just some incredible authors who are going to be on future episodes of the show. Of course, I just talked to Tony Knighton. He's a Philadelphia resident, and his interview will either have been on the show at this point or will be on the show. We'll see how the timing works out. And I'll be interviewing other authors. And you did a story called Lacquer. What's that about?
I did. Well, that was really interesting because I was invited to contribute to this anthology the very day after I had plotted a trilogy based in San Francisco, noir thriller style, kind of playing with giallo tropes, and I was quite inspired, and I'd nutted out this whole plot. Well, in a very thin way, I have to say, but the main character, my private investigator, I just thought was fantastic. And as soon as I got the invitation, I thought, right, that's it. I'm going to write a short story that can form the first chapter of this trilogy. And so I got stuck into it with much enthusiasm. And it's the story of it's not a story of somebody who solves the crime in that short story. There's not enough time for that, but rather solves who the person is who has died.
Oh.
And there's an issue with identifying the body. And so I've kind of got this washed up alcoholic, PI in San Francisco who's doing, low-grade insurance jobs and so on, and missing persons occasionally. And it's set in the 1980s. So I was researching San Francisco in the mid-80s, just at the time when they were demolishing the old sections of Fillmore and other areas, and putting up skyscrapers and gentrifying, etc., etc. And and of course it was at the time of the AIDS epidemic there. Mm-hmm. And that was really sad. So I incorporate that into the story too. And then, of course, after I wrote it, I went there. So then I became paranoid about the hills because they are pretty steep. And, take a photograph and it flattens. I don't know what it is about photography, but it flattens, at least on my phone, flattens the hills. They don't look as steep. And then the same thing with Google Maps. You go on Street View and you know what it's like. It doesn't really do justice to depth of field. you can't get the sense. And I was there, I was thinking, oh, my goodness, have I stuffed up? Have I made a road flat that actually goes up and down? So, but I checked, and I think I'm right.
I remember the roads. I remember riding in friends' cars and holding on to the seat as we went down at a 90-degree angle. You're like dropping in San Francisco. We have an excerpt from your story, Lacquer, which was read by our English folk singer David Walton, and we will pause with Isobel Blackthorn for a few moments so we can play that excerpt. This is from A Time for Violence. It's out from Close to the Bone in May, and you can pre-order that at Amazon.com and find a link for that order at our website at www.whatareyoufraidofpodcast.com, where you can find more information out about Isobel and links to her websites and her work over at www.whatareyoufraidofpodcast.com. Of course, this is What Are You Afraid Of? We're on ParaX Radio at 9 o'clock on Friday nights Eastern Standard Time. That's Philadelphia Mean Spiritual Time. And you can also download us from all major podcast services. And if there's a service out there that we're not on, either I'm getting us there or they're not good enough for us. This is Lacquer from Isobel Blackthorn on What Are You Afraid Of?
Lacquer. Excerpt from the new crime horror anthology, A Time for Violence. Written by Isobel Blackthorn. Read by David Walton. The punk left the smell of his ass on the seat, sharp with meaty undertones. Not knowing where the stench came from, Marcia screwed up her nose as she took up his place, the vinyl still warm. Hitting the high notes real fine tonight, Marcia. Her rendition of Misty was near perfect, as far as I could tell. She was no Sarah Vaughan, and she knew it, but she was good enough, more than good enough for the Fillmore. Why, thank you kindly, sir, she replied, putting on a cheesy southern drawl. She ordered a drink. Over on the dais, a trio were leaning towards each other across their instruments. It was a good night, the venue full, patrons planning on staying till stumps. I should be going. You gonna stagger all the way home? Stagger? Come on, Marcia, I'm not trashed. Sure you're not. She observed me in that mocking, shrewd-eyed way of hers. I hated that she was right. The club slid to the right as I stood. I gripped the bar until the woozy feeling settled, then headed for the door, squinting as my feet hit the sidewalk. Friday, midnight, late August, and Fillmore Street was lively, revellers garbed in the glitzy and the outrageous spilling out of clubs and bars on their way to others. But even in my inebriated state, I saw through the razzmatazz to the iniquity beneath. The punks, the pimps, the crack dealers, and the homeless shambling or cowering in doorways. The smell of frying onions from the burger joint across the street and my guts heaved. I stumbled down the alleyway beside Dizzy's and leaned a hand against the wall as the contents of my stomach, bourbon, more bourbon, and whatever was left of the tuna hash I ate earlier, gushed from my mouth with the force of a geyser. Void, I straightened, wiped my chin, spat away the acridity, the half-digested gobbets. I made to walk away, but my shoe had caught on something. Fabric, maybe. I pulled the toe to the side. Felt like a sleeve. I squinted at my foot, but the alley was too dark to see. I fumbled around in the pockets of my coat. The torch was down there somewhere, buried deep in loose change and old receipts. The usual detritus. I found it, wrapped my hand around the shaft, flicked on the switch. The batteries were still good. The thin beam picked out the spread of my vomit, the way it pooled in the folds of a coat. Shining the light at my feet, I stepped back, leaving behind a bloody footprint that disappeared as I watched, obliterated by the blood flowing from beneath the coat cuff. This was all too recent, the blood no doubt still warm. I pulled back some more, scuffed the toes of my shoe in the dust. Would it sink in through the shoe leather, the sock, my skin, my flesh, to mingle with my own through a nick or a cut? Paranoia. The prick of a syringe, the needle sinking deep into my vein, and I awakened to myself knowing it was already too late. You can't catch the cancer twice. The body was prone, female judging by the curves, the hair. She was thin, average in height. The legs were out straight, missing the feet. Giving the body a wide berth, I walked around to see the face. There was no face. Shock, a single current, sliced through me, sobering. What might have been the forehead, the cheeks, the mouth, was a tangle of skin flaps and mangled flesh. No nose. The mouth split in four. The teeth were missing, the gums ragged. Even her ears had been hacked. All that was left of normal were her eyes. Eyes staring ahead in terror. Was she alive when he did this? Fascination drew me. There was artistry in the mutilation, a certain symmetry, as though every cut, every fold or bulge of skin and bone and flesh had been considered. This was no frenzied attack of an impulsive killer in a rage. She'd been flayed, her skin peeled back like so many petals of a flower. I shone the light over the body. The coat had most of her covered. I had to be grateful for that. But where were her hands? Gone, the same way as the feet. Whoever did this didn't want her identified. I walked around, shining the torch at the ground, looking for clues. There was nothing, not even a footprint. I pointed the light back at the body. I was planning on heading back into Dizzy's to call the cops when the side door opened and a figure stepped outside. It was Marcia. My liquor-fueled brain was slow to register I still had the torch shining down at the carnage before me. The scream that came out of Marcia's mouth was curdling. She had a direct line of sight to the face. Hi, I'm David Walton, and I drop whatever I'm doing to read whatever Fox and Phil demand of me. My digital, as opposed to ectoplasmic alter ego, is called Brendan Shawland, who regularly plays guitar and sings in a virtual world. Brendan has a website, David doesn't. Bandcamp sales figures would suggest that Brendan's music is decidedly niche. If you want to be in the vanguard of support as Brendan heads towards global domination, just put Brendan Shawland in your favourite search engine, and you'll find his website very close to the top. You'll see what the human looks like, and you can check out the Listen to a Song page to access Brendan's unwillingly private world of creative output.
What happens to a ghost when their home is torn down? No one thinks of the disembodied when they rip down old buildings, dig up cemeteries, and build clean, unhauntable condos. Every year, hundreds of spirits are driven out of their own haunts by the careless living to exist alone with no one to scare. At Para-X Radio, our hosts feel the plight of these evicted disembodied, and we're reaching out to you to please open your heart to one of these lost souls, such as the ghost soldier of the General Wayne Inn or the abandoned spirit cat of Benjamin Rush. So please, please, let a little spooky into your life. Won't you open your house to a ghost without a home?
Para-X. Well, that's a really potent story. We appreciate you sharing that with us. And of course, David Walton did a marvelous job narrating our work. And we're going to put up some songs from David, sort of his What Are You Afraid Of collection, over at the website at www.whatareyoufraidofpodcast.com. We appreciate everything he's done for us. And we are talking to Isobel Blackthorn, all the way from Australia, as we explore multinational authors through time and space, and we're having a lovely time talking to her. So it's Women in Horrors Month right now in February. I don't know when this will play, probably not February, or maybe towards the end of February. And women, right now we're celebrating women in horror, and of course there's been an imbalance that we've been trying to address, especially when you go to horror conventions and other authors' convention that's mostly predominantly male, and yet women's voice is growing. And I wanted to talk to you. What special challenges do you feel women authors face in the industry?
They're twofold, really. Partly, it's about being accepted as somebody who can write good horror. You know, that the industry may view women authors as can't quite cut it, not up to the mark. But I think that's changing. We're proving that we can do it really well and in original ways. Perhaps in the area of gatekeepers and getting your work recognised by the sort of top industry magazines and things like that. That's where I see a lot of male domination, but again, that's changing. I know I was a member of the Horror Writers Association, and I'm trying to remember the ratio of men to women in terms of the membership. Maybe but I know the Australasian Horror Writers Association is 50% female. We have a lot of women horror writers, and some really big names here, like Kieran Warren and Lee Murray and others, who are not only terrific authors, but are quite public, and vocal. So we've got role models to aspire to. So that helps enormously.
Excellent. Oh, thank you for that. And we shall check out some of their work too. It's so nice talking to you tonight, and thank you again for being on the show. So, what kind of advice would you give authors just getting started? Write every day. Make a commitment to writing every single day. Almost without fail. I think Stephen King said that in his memoir on writing, that no matter what happens, he writes every day. It is it does require that level of commitment, and also get advice, learn how to be a good writer. Don't settle for what you've written as good enough. Make it better. There's heaps of ways you can do that. Read as well. Read the best fiction you can find, just keep striving. It's what it takes. It's just practice, really. You get good at anything by practice. So, how do you deal with rejection? I'm used to it. Oh, I know. I remember way back in 2011, and I wanted desperately to get one of my short stories published in a literary journal in Australia, and I kept writing them and I kept submitting them, and they kept getting rejected, and then I get a little sticky note saying, well done, or I'd got shortlisted a couple of times, but close but no cigar. Yeah. And I was feeling completely demoralised, and then a small press offered to publish the whole lot in a collection, and I thought, wow, there you go, see, someone thinks I'm okay. Mm-hmm. And from then, my first novel, the same thing, sent it to every single publisher in Australia, which is not quite as onerous as if you did the same thing in the States. I think we rank 15th in the world in terms of market size, but still a fair few publishers, and every single one rejected, but one accepted me. Mm-hmm. And that started the ball rolling. And so you just got to keep, you have a thick skin, don't take it personally, and keep going.
it takes, I don't know, what I think between 5 and 10 years, maybe an average of 7 years to feel like you're getting anywhere, unless you get lucky. Some people get very lucky, their first novel gets picked up by a major press and they're off and running, but most of us, have to battle for years to get anywhere.
I always like to think that the best thing that can happen to a professional author is a series of rejections, because it teaches you. It does. It's the transition to a professional.
Well, to be professional, the worst thing, I think, is arrogance. And I think humility goes a long way in this world of writing and publishing. We're a community, and we should be, supporting each other, and not trying to just. It's not an individual thing, just trying to get ahead personally.
Are you ever going to be done writing? Will there ever be a moment when you say, I've done all I've done, I've written what I wanted to write?
Oh, you know what? Sometimes I do. And when I feel like that, I put it on Facebook. I say, I'm not really sure, blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly I get all these comments. I think, oh, dear, no, I probably should keep going. I actually really do enjoy it that much. And, it can get hard work sometimes. You think, gosh, what about the rest of my life? Do I have the rest of my life? This is my life. It's all my life. This is all I do. And, it's a bit mono in a way. It's hard to be balanced about it. That's how I am. So I take breaks and go away, get away from the desk, the house, go on holiday somewhere, catch up with friends and recharge, and come back, and I'm back into it and putting in the usual 12-hour days, writing and promoting that sort of stuff, this sort of stuff, podcasts, writing articles, doing whatever. And I write book reviews as well, so I spend a lot of time reading and writing reviews for other authors.
I saw.
And so it's a whole life, really. So no, I think I've got quite a lot of books in me, and just when I think I might run out of ideas, I have more ideas. At the moment, I've told my mind I don't want any more ideas. I've got too many.
We're talking to Isobel Blackthorn, and it's great speaking to her on What Are You Afraid of? Horror and Paranormal Show. And your website is over at, it is isobelblackthorn.com, where you can find more information about you, these book reviews, and of course your various books and travel articles, which are a lot of fun. I enjoy writing small things myself, and of course cooking and traveling and learning about setting. And it definitely feels like you're a genus loci spiritual author. You like the spirit of the place. That's what you summon in your work, and I look forward to reading more about that. So you sound like you're very open to the paranormal, to the other side, to the veil, silver veil. Now, and I already know the answer to this, I can imagine, but have you ever had a paranormal experience?
I've had a few.
Would you like to share one with us?
I was thinking about which one to share. There was one time I was, they've always arisen out of me mucking around with Ouija, and, stuff like that. And I think it was one time when I was playing with Ouija. I was 19 years old, and I was staying with some relatives in their house in Canberra in Australia, and they were out during the day at work, and I was home alone, and there was a clock on the television, and this clock didn't work. It hadn't worked for years, apparently. It was just sitting there. Well, you know what? That clock started ticking. Just spontaneously, all by itself. It hadn't been moved. No one had come and jumped on the floor beside it, or, vibration or anything like that. It just started ticking. And then, just as I was absorbing that, the alarm went off. I couldn't believe it. I was really very alarmed. And when these relatives of mine came home from work, I told them about the clock, because the clock just stopped again, And they said no, it had never, not in years and years, that it had ever worked. And I saw that as a sign to leave Ouija well alone.
Leave Ouija well alone by Isobel Blackthorn. That's wonderful. So do you have anything coming out in the future? Anything you'd like to tell us about?
The story that I'm working on right now will be the next story that comes out, my family history, which incidentally my great grandmother was she wasn't born in, but she lived in Philadelphia where you are. Yeah, and she was a private nurse, and I've just got her meeting my great grandfather in a little house in Trenton. Mm-hmm. In Trenton, New Jersey, just up the road from Philadelphia.
Indeed.
But it was very sad when I went on Google Maps because it was a very run-down area with houses boarded up and everything. But I kind of figured 1907, it was a little different to how it was, how it is today. But I had 5 novels published in 2018. 4 of them came out in 1 week in December. So I'm kind of not in a hurry to have another publication, maybe at the end of this year.
Talk to and support authors such as yourself. You have a story in the upcoming A Time for Violence, which is going to be incredible. That's out on May 1st, and you can pre-order that at Amazon.com. Again, find a link for that at www.whatareyoufraidofpodcast.com. It's basically the premier noir mystery horror anthology for 2019, and we're really looking forward to seeing that when it comes out. The cover art looks wonderful. And have you seen the cover for it?
It's absolutely terrific, and I can't wait to read the other stories. And I haven't read a single one.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been incredible speaking to you.
Well, thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
It has. And you have your website at isobelblackthorn.com.
Yeah, Isobel. And Blackthorn with no E.
Blackthorn with no E. You sound like one of those magicians, Isobel Blackthorn. Creator of magic and haunter of houses, and you can hopefully check out her writing room over at our website at www.whatareyoufraidofpodcast.com, where you can find more information about Isobel and her writings and links to her website, plus all of our it's probably about 113 episodes at this point. I've lost track, trying not to go insane, and plus our narrated ghost stories, music from David Walton, information about all of our previous guests, and interviews, articles, recipes even, plus interviews and material and articles that aren't featured on the show itself. You can head over. We're going to be interviewing some authors for Women in Horror and women authors in general. I just interviewed Carson Buckingham, and she's really a neat author. You should check her out, and we'll have her written interview up at the website at www.whatareyoufraidofpodcast.com. Any parting words for our audience, Isobel?
Enjoy your day. Read tons of horror. Support women writers of horror, and support What Are You So Afraid Of?
Well, thank you so much. And this has been Isobel Blackthorn, and this is T. Fox Dunham.
That kind of, old hippie stuff.
T. Fox Dunham lives in Philadelphia with his wife Allison. He's a lymphoma survivor, cancer patient, modern bard, and historian. His first book, The Street Martyr, was published by Gutter Books. A major motion picture based on the book is being produced by Throughline Films. Destroying the Tangible Illusion of Reality or Searching for Andy Kaufman, a book about what it's like to be dying of cancer, was recently released from Perpetual Motion Machine Publishing, and Fox has a story in the next Stargate anthology from MGM and Fandemonium Books, Points of Origin. Fox is an active member of the Horror Writers Association, and he's had published hundreds of short stories and articles. His motto is Wrecking Civilization, one story at a time.
Phil Thomas is an author and screenwriter from the suburbs of Philadelphia. His screenplays have been produced into feature films False Face and Always from Darkness, and are available in major retailers such as Best Buy and Target, as well as availability on Netflix and Amazon On Demand. His short films can be viewed on his YouTube channel, Film Zero Presents. He is a member of the International Association of Professional Writers and Editors, and he currently writes for Cultured Vultures, Game Skinny, and BloodyDisgusting.com. His first novel, The Poe Predicament, is being published in 2018 by Caliburn Press.
The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of ParaX, its affiliates, or its sponsors.